going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
At the movies, the Mafia is big screen entertainment.
Don't ever take sides with anyone against the family again. Ever.
But in Australia today,
we believe we have about 51 Italian organised crime clans in Australia.
They are Italian crime families who are very real.
The Italians have been able to fly under the radar for many, many years.
And extremely deadly.
They work in this secrecy and silence.
You talk, you die.
Tonight,
it's entirely possible that people would be living next door to members of the Ndrangheta without knowing.
What happened when the Mafia moved into a country town?
Don had someone in mind that he was determined he would finger.
When one man stands up to them...
The guts that that man had was absolutely incredible.
And another looks away.
Al Grassby was playing for the wrong team.
Will reveal the dark story of the concerned citizen and the powerful politician.
The greatest suit you can wear is the suit of your own innocence.
Bottom line, are we saying Al Grassby was a member of the Mafia? As we investigate the execution of anti-drugs campaigner Donald McKay.
Sweet Jesus, they've just signed Don McKay's death warrant.
Good evening, I'm Liz Hayes, and this is Under Investigation. Donald McKay's story too was the stuff of gripping television drama. The country town good guy...
Do we really want to be known as the pot capital of Australia? I say no, what do you say?
Fighting Mafia mobsters.
Robert Chimbali, thanks for coming.
A dodgy politician.
You know who I am? Al Grassby, Federal Commissioner for Community Relations.
And who pays the ultimate price.
Those look like drag marks. Looks like murder, boss.
Murder requires a body warrant.
But the truth is much worse. It began back in the 1950s and 60s, when thousands of hard-working Italian migrants arrived in Australia, and many to the New South Wales riverina town of Griffith. But amongst them also came clans from the merciless and secretive Calabrian Mafia, the Ndrangheta.
They largely originated from one town in Calabria called Plati.
Kate McClimate is one of our 4 experts tonight. As a Sydney Morning Herald journalist, she spent decades investigating the Italian Ndrangheta in Australia.
They act collaboratively and they marry within the same clans, the same relations, and they're governed by a very strict code called omerta, which is basically you talk, you die.
They are a violent, massive organisation.
Jim Slade is a former detective with the Bureau of Criminal Intelligence, a key player who tracked the Mafia's early stranglehold on cultivation and supply of marijuana.
Their ability to have cannabis plantations all over the east coast of Australia takes a hell of a lot of organisation. And the only way to do that, the only way to control that, is by murder and as much violence as they can bring to the table.
Also joining us, 2 men who take us to the dark heart of Donald McKay's murder. Griffith's fearless former newspaper editor, Terry Jones, and legendary retired New South Wales undercover drug squad detective, Mick Drury. It is somewhat incredible the Calabrian Mafia chooses a little riverina town as a base. But it does. By the early 1970s, amidst the orange orchards, local godfathers are cultivating huge crops of marijuana.
When a lot of those farms were operating in Griffiths, oranges were selling for $150 a tonne. 1 tonne of marijuana was going for $33,000. So all of a sudden, money became the order of the day.
The good citizens of Griffith had no idea they were living next door to the Mafia. But what they did notice was that some of their newest neighbours were seemingly awash with money. Kate, this kind of money is obvious in a small town, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that caught people's attention, was that humble farmers were suddenly emerging with what's now known as their grass castles, meaning money from marijuana. And you notice these things. You notice when your previously impoverished neighbour suddenly has a very fancy house, a flash car. You know, they've got the fountains, the colonnades. They didn't hide their wealth.
They have really consolidated everything that they brought from Calabria, and they've just re-established it in that community.
Terry Jones has a deep and very personal experience of the Griffith Mafia and was a good friend of the man who took them on, Donald McKay.
I'm still alive because they made the biggest mistake they ever made by killing Don, and they weren't going to repeat it.
Donald McKay. In many ways, he was an unlikely hero, an ordinary man who simply took a stand. As Griffith's local furniture store owner and aspiring politician, he is one of the first to realise his hometown was fast becoming a major centre for drug plantations and is rolling in mafia money. So he decides to expose the godfathers.
He had someone in mind that he was determined that he would finger. And whether it was Bob Trimboli, whether it was Al Grassby, whether it was somebody else, we do not know. But he kept saying, there's only one I'm interested in. And that's about the time that Don was really a dead man walking.
Despite petitions and protests by the citizens group fronted by Don McKay, which includes his wife Barbara, the Griffith Mafia's drug-growing business is flourishing, generating millions. Its money man is a colourful local identity of Calabrian heritage. Panel beater and pinball machine mechanic nicknamed Aussie Bob, real name Robert Trimboli. Don McKay swiftly understands that Robert Trimboli is Griffith's public enemy number one. In 1975, his Concerned Citizens group reported Trimboli to the New South Wales Drug Squad, which counted in its ranks Detective Mick Drury.
Trimboli was a great asset to the families down there. He was a great asset.
He was retail, wasn't he? He was
yes, he was.
He was the money man.
He was. He was the man with the way about him and the connections, and this is where the product went to and the money came back in return. And in Griffith...
As Mick Drury reveals, Trimboli's gambling tab alone was able to show he had access to millions.
We're talking about 3.5 million on Bobby Trimboli, who was bankrupt a couple of years earlier.
But while Donald McKay voiced his suspicions about Aussie Bob Trimboli...
Well, thank you very much, Terry.
The other prominent town citizen, Al Grassby, was seen to be standing up for members of the Mafia.
On the one hand, you had Donald McKay and a large group of concerned citizens.
Absolutely, big time.
Worried about the future of Griffith and Australia per se. And on the other hand, you had good old Al Grassby. They were marching against each other up the main street. Am I correct?
Exactly, yeah.
So don't talk to me about Al Grassby.
Coming up...
Look, all the indications were that he was on the payroll of the Mafia
we reveal the Mafia links.
They had somebody who was their mouthpiece saying this thing about the Mafia, it doesn't exist.
Of one of Australia's most senior politicians.
There were a lot of Italian Australians and Australian Australians who were very concerned about Al Grassby, glued at the hip to the wrong people.
That's next on Under Investigation. It's the early 1970s, and many fear the New South Wales Riverina town of Griffith is being controlled by the Calabrian Mafia, known as the Ndrangheta. A fact that will bring two of its most prominent citizens face to face in a dark showdown. Anti-drugs campaigner Don McKay and Al Grassby, who will become one of Australia's most senior politicians.
Well, that would be a most improper action on his part. I'm shocked to hear that.
For the first time, we'll expose tonight how the Mafia had a mole at the highest level of federal parliament.
Look, I think Al Grassby was probably one of the most corrupt politicians.
Al Grassby and Donald McKay were long-time opponents, from when Grassby won the federal seat of Riverina for the Labor Party in 1969. Never more two different people, would you say, Al Grassby and Donald McKay?
Yes, Don was there to serve. And Al was there to take a stage.
They were diametrically opposed in personality. They were absolutely diametrically opposed.
Definitely.
On the one hand, you had this family man who was a vibrant supporter of community initiatives. On the other hand, you had dear old Al. Half the time he dressed like Liberace, he had so many colours. They were entirely different.
But as you'll see tonight, Grassby's colourful public persona masked a man playing a deadly game of politics and much more.
The black market is already there.
A man who, at every turn, it seemed, opposed, sometimes even ridiculed, Don McKay's claims that the Mafia had brought the drug trade to Griffith. It was already known Grassby was keeping company with Mafia strongmen, local godfathers Peter Calipari and Robert Aussie Bob Trimboli.
I can tell you now, there were a lot of Italian Australians and Australian Australians in Griffith who were very concerned about Al Grassby, glued at the hip to the wrong people, which also included Bobby Trimboli.
Australia is a migrant nation. We will always have migrants.
Every time that someone would get up in Parliament and make mention either of Italians or Calabrians or the Mafia, Al would slam back in their face that they were racist and that they had no right to treat people like that. And time and time again, it's quite obvious that he used that as a shield for himself and his actions for the Calabrians.
Grassby's strong ties with his Griffith connections were never more evident than when he decided to visit the Ndrangheta hometown of Plati in Calabria, where he received a celebrity welcome. But it should be of no surprise, says internationally renowned Mafia expert Professor Antonio Nicaso. It is, he says, a Mafia tactic to form associations with powerful people.
The strategy of the Ndrangheta was to connect themselves to the social elite, to have a friend in power. I think Australia failed to understand that. To target the Mafia, they had to uncover the link of that organization to politicians, businessmen, professionals, the so-called social elite.
When Gough Whitlam came to power in 1972, the fast-talking, sharp-dressing Grassby was elevated to the powerful portfolio of Minister for Immigration. It meant he was perfectly placed to assist friends, as he already had for Griffith godfather Peter Calipari. A nationwide police operation tracking Calabrian Mafia members scooped up Calipari, arresting him for possession of an unlicensed pistol. Grassby boldly defended him.
Al Grassby, he gave character evidence on behalf of Peter Calipari, and he, in fact, in Parliament, came out and said, if you believe there's a mafia in Australia, you've been watching too much late-night television.
So how did Al Grassby get in this position?
Look, all the indications were that he was on the payroll of the Mafia for years and years and years.
Sydney Morning Herald journalist Kate McClimate investigated Al Grassby's connections with the Griffith Mafia.
At every opportunity, he would play down any reference to the Mafia. And I think that people don't understand that the power of the Mafia often came from the infiltration or putting people in necessary places. In return, they were getting favours. You know, one of the most famous being Al Grassby getting an immigration visa for Dominic Barbaro, who was suspected of being involved in kidnappings in Calabria.
It was a brazen act by Grassby as Australia's immigration minister at the time, given Dominic Barbaro had repeatedly been refused entry to Australia in the past because of his criminal history, and that he was now under suspicion by Italian authorities.
Dominic was given the entry visa in April, and then he goes back to Italy in May, and he's arrested and charged and jailed for that kidnapping. So, I mean, Grassby had to have known.
It wouldn't take long for local voters to start changing their minds about their representative. Al Grassby would lose his federal seat in 1974, not helped by Don McKay running against him and ensuring his preferences went against the immigration minister.
And what are your immediate plans? What do you intend to do now?
Well, during the next month or so, Al Grassby will be, citizen, private.
It wasn't the end of Grassby, though. He was soon appointed Australia's first Commissioner for Community Relations, responsible for administering the Racial Discrimination Act.
Is this a smack in the eye for those that were racist in every part of Australia? And the answer is yes.
From that prominent position, Al Grassby continued to publicly oppose Donald McKay and, as you'll see, privately support the Mafia. It was an inexcusable position to take as the Mafia started to single out Mackay. Coming up, how the biggest drug haul...
It was 78,000 plus cannabis plants, solid cannabis.
In Australian history...
It was just breathtaking.
...sealed the fate of Griffith's good man.
Sweet Jesus, they've just signed Don McKay's death warrant.
That's next on Under Investigation. Tonight, our investigation takes us back to the 1970s and to Griffith in New South Wales Riverina, the town chosen by the Calabrian Mafia as one of its primary Australian bases for drug cultivation and distribution.
Their ability to have cannabis plantations all over the east coast of Australia takes a hell of a lot of organisation, and the only way to control that is by as much violence as they can bring to the table.
Anti-drugs campaigner Donald McKay has taken them on. But local politician Al Grassby, whom we've revealed is almost certainly in the Mafia's grasp, scoffs at McKay and his claims of large-scale marijuana cultivation in the region, calling the allegations anti-Italian and racist.
Is this a smack in the eye for those that were racist in every part of Australia? And the answer is yes.
Undeterred, McKay and his Concerned Citizens group continued their public fight against drugs. And by now, they had no faith in the Griffith detectives. And they were right to be wary. 3 of the local detectives, Jack Ellis, Brian Borthwick and John Robbins, would later be convicted and jailed for perverting the course of justice. So, in 1975, when Donald McKay had word that a large plantation was being cultivated in the nearby town of Coleambally, he went to the Sydney Drug Squad for help. Now retired former undercover detective Mick Drury was part of that squad. Mick, were you told that the local cops can't be trusted?
We were told, and we agreed. We locked it down.
But were you aware that Donald McKay was not trusting this information with Griffith authorities?
100%.
So he says there's this plantation at Coleambally. He sits with you on a bed in a motel.
Yeah.
He draws a map.
Yes, I drew the map. He gave me the instructions. I drew the map.
Is he nervous?
No, he's not. He's just a good community person.
Did he know that this could be trouble for him?
No, because he knew he was safe talking to us.
Using Donald McKay's furniture store as their operations base, Mick Drury's team secretly planned their raid. And on the morning of November the 10th, 1975, they swooped.
It was very early in the morning, and we went out about 5:30, 6 in the morning. Gosh, I was 22 years of age. Nothing was going to stop me that day. I was as keen as anything.
Bulletproof, Mick.
We went to the property. It was an 1,100-acre property. I used language that I can't use on TV to encourage this guy to open up the gate. The police cars come in behind me, and I went straight down the back of the property. And I could see in front of me this amazing cannabis plantation. In the daylight, I could not see the back of the property. And to the right, I could not see where the plantation finished. It was just breathtaking. It was 21.46 acres or 78,000 plus cannabis plants, solid cannabis.
How many millions was it worth?
Oh.
Like in today's...
It's 187 odd million in today's money.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
In fact, at the time, it was Australia's largest ever cannabis bust, which went almost unreported as it occurred the day before the Whitlam government was sacked by Governor-General Sir John Kerr.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
A moment of national crisis. But 400 kilometres away in Coleambally, a moment perhaps just as grave. The realisation that the Mafia had truly taken hold in Australia.
The fact of the matter is, we did not believe the enormity of the organisation we were dealing with.
For Jim Slade, who at the time was a detective with the Bureau of Criminal Intelligence, the realisation was also chilling.
Like Mick, I couldn't believe that an organisation could be so big without us doing something about it and without us knowing more about it. So that was when it really hit me.
4 men were charged with the Coleambally bust. When the case went to court 2 years later, their barristers convinced the judge to hand over the police notebooks and with them the name of the man who provided the information about the crop, Donald McKay. Mick, what a devastating moment.
Oh, it was shocking. It was shocking. Look, I don't purport to be a legal scholar, but the foundation for allowing the Defence Counsel to take that document, the diary of my boss, was unprecedented.
Is that what they did?
Yes.
Were you worried? Were you... Now, he's been outed. The enemy now knows. I mean...
They knew.
Yes, I was worried. Yes, I was worried.
Terry Jones, editor of the Griffith Area News and friend of Don McKay, was given the dreadful news by his court reporter.
My reporter, Harry Fenwick, came back and said, "Sweet Jesus, they've just signed Don McKay's death warrant."
Jim, how do you sit when you're a policeman and that's your informant now been exposed?
That's exactly right, especially as a plainclothes police officer. You put so much effort into getting good informants, and there's a trust develops between the informant and the police officer, and that must be there. And in this case, Don McKay could see that he was completely sold down the drain.
But it was a terrible moment, and Kate, you'd look at that and go, wow, what's going to happen now?
It's a confidential source, and to think that that source who gave the information in good faith is now out there, and the Mafia now know that it's Don McKay who gave that evidence.
Donald McKay had now well and truly caught the attention of his enemies. He had ensured their biggest marijuana plantation was cut down, and significantly, he helped unseat the Mafia's political friend, Al Grassby. McKay contributing to the loss of Al Grassby, was that a mark against him by the Mafia?
I think it was a mark against him because, you know, they had somebody who was their mouthpiece in Parliament saying to Parliament this thing about the Mafia, it doesn't exist. So there was a lot of anger about McKay contributing to Al Grassby's political demise.
If we're going to accept Al Grassby is their man, he's gone. The Colliamberley bust occurs and other busts occur, and Donald McKay is the man who's their problem.
And there were a lot
Big
of things.
time. Al Grassby was playing for the wrong team.
Coming up,
it was very, very clear that he was an absolute thorn in their side.
The decision was made that he had to be got rid of.
the Mafia's excellent murder.
His death really focused our eyes on what was truly happening in a quiet country town.
That's next on Under Investigation. Donald McKay's name has been leaked to the Mafia as the man who called in the New South Wales drug squad to uncover one of the biggest drug seizures in Australian history. He has also helped unseat local politician Al Grassby, who, as we've revealed, was almost certainly on the Mafia's payroll. It is believed that in May 1977, the Griffith godfathers held a final meeting to decide what to do about Donald McKay. Those present, it's alleged, include Robert Aussie Bob Trimboli and local winemaker Tony Sergi. Do they pay him off? Do they compromise him with a woman?
Or murder.
Or murder.
Mm.
They sentence Donald McKay to death.
The decision was made because of the loss of money and the loss of everything to the family that he had to be got rid of.
It would be what the Mafia calls an excellent murder, according to Professor Antonio Nicaso.
Excellent murders refer to the murder of important people, like a magistrate, like a political activist, like a journalist, those type of victims.
And the reason they do that is to show everybody that no one is above the power and the reach of the Ndrangheta.
Jim Slade says Donald McKay may not have realised he'd been judged by the Godfathers as a threat to their criminal empire.
You've got to have had information that could cause a great loss of money. You've got to be disrespectful to the Ndrine or the clan, and also bringing their secret society to the public notice. And sadly, Don McKay ticked all of those boxes.
In the week before he died, the Ndrangheta families of Griffith were aware that something was going to happen.
Mick, did he ever voice his concerns to you?
No, he didn't, but it was very, very clear that he was an absolute thorn in their side, politically and from a criminal perspective with their enterprise.
Well, the decision was made that Donald McKay would have to die. And on Friday night, July 15th, 1977, McKay drops into the Griffith Hotel after work for a drink with friends. Just before 7 p.m, with a cask of Coolabah Riesling he'd bought at the bottle shop, he returns to his car. On that night, Mick, he sounds like every other Australian. He's going home to his family. You know, he's got a couple of drinks and he's not thinking, I've got to be careful, I'm assuming.
He's had a big week at work, a fantastic guy. He was going home to have the weekend with his family and friends.
From evidence at the scene, it appears that as Donald McKay reached his car, he was ambushed. There was blood, 3 bullet casings, but no body. Let's go to the car park. What do we know happened?
Just from the photographs that we've been able to look at, it appears that Don approached his motor vehicle, and it looks like he's been going to put his keys in the car when he was shot. The blood has splattered onto the windscreen, and as he slid down, his hand has left a sliding impression down the window and down onto the door.
Does that mean he's been shot from behind?
To me, that's what it would appear, that he's been shot from behind. Now, it appears that there wasn't drag marks which would be consistent with someone pulling him to the back of a car. So I think it's unlikely that the person was strong enough to lift him from the ground and put him in a vehicle. There's no way in the world, even when I was young and fit, 22, there's no way in the world I would have been able to pick a man of that size off the ground and put him into the back of a car.
So you think there has to be more than one person?
I believe there's 2, and just from experience and looking at how the Italians worked, they would have wanted some sort of positive information and corroboration that Donald McKay had been murdered.
One of the interesting things was that the police moved very quickly to describe it as a disappearance. You know, as Jim's just said, there's a hand mark, there's 3 shells, there's a local man who hears bang, bang, bang in quick succession, and yet it's very quickly painted as a disappearance, not a murder. And I think that was a very interesting way to treat, basically one of the country's first political assassinations.
It was very sad. It was a very sad night, and it just blew me away.
Did you have an instant thought, Mafia?
Oh, I knew the connections. Yes, I knew the connections.
Inside Griffith Police Station, the 24 detectives sift through the hundreds of pages of information surrounding the case.
Australia was shocked, and many in Griffith were shaken and angry following McKay's disappearance and probable murder.
When the police first came to see me, I just knew straight away when they told me what they'd found that Don had gone.
How many people have known for years about what's been going on, that there is marijuana growing in the...
David Frost, Britain's star investigative journalist, flew to Griffith to host a special town hall meeting within weeks of the killing. Present were both Barbara Mackay and Al Grassby.
But you do admit now, obviously, that there was a tremendous lot going on. That you
well, apparently now. And of course, people must have known that.
Well, a lady
Despite an overwhelming belief that Donald McKay had been murdered for his anti-drugs campaign,
February 27th, 1974, February the 4th, 1974, police raid 5 acres of marijuana.
Al Grassby maintained he knew nothing of local mafia nor of any issue with drugs.
Don't you read the area news, Mr. Grassby?
Can I just say to the young lady, that in 1974, I received one complaint of all the people that I saw. Now, I'm sorry, but you didn't see me in 1974. Confidence is the great thing, and hope. What do you say?
Grassby would also be implicated in the circulation of a scurrilous letter suggesting that Donald McKay had actually been murdered by his wife, his son, and his best friend.
Disgusting letter.
And it actually said Barbara McKay, her son Paul, and their lawyer Ian Salmon, that they did the murder of their own husband, son, and friend.
Police claim today Grassby was paid $40,000 by Trimboli.
A National Crime Authority investigator would testify Grassby was paid $40,000 to circulate the letter.
This is what the witness actually said. This thing with Grassby, he was bribed to do certain jobs. Grassby was in the clique, in the clan, as you would call it, the Mafia. Even the witnesses who knew Bob Trimboli said that Al Grassby was right in the thick of it, and he was being paid drug money to do the bidding of his political masters.
The NCA got two corroborators to say that that money had actually been paid to Grassby.
The suggestion of any association between Robert Trimboli and myself is utterly false, a malicious fabrication.
Should there be an investigation into Al Grassby?
Yes. Criminologists should be looking at things like this to work out how do police officers get corrupted, how do politicians get corrupted. And this is a case where they could be looking at that and to see the evolvement of Al Grassby to the stage where he was so weak and gutless that he dropped into the shit pit and took that $40,000 for that document.
Al Grassby, though, always loudly proclaimed his innocence.
The greatest suit you can wear is the suit of your own innocence.
Bottom line, are we saying Al Grassby was a member of the Mafia?
I wouldn't say he was a member, but he was...
He was a facilitator.
An associate.
But did he profit from the money?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
No matter what, he took their money.
He took their money.
Coming up...
Evil triumphs when good men say nothing.
Donald McKay's legacy in the fight against organised crime.
They've been able to operate in darkness for so long that we're shining a light on it.
We need another Don. We need another Don McKay in Griffith.
That's next on Under Investigation.
Confidence is the great thing, and hope.
Tonight, our investigation has revealed that one of Australia's most senior politicians, 1970s Federal Immigration Minister Al Grassby, was also perhaps the highest-placed mafia mole in our country's history.
He was bribed to do certain jobs. Grassby was in the clique, in the clan, as you would call it, the Mafia.
A man who, even after the murder of his political enemy, Donald McKay, tried to draw attention away from the Mafia's involvement.
But you do admit now, obviously, that there was a tremendous lot going on that you
Well,
didn't
apparently
know about.
now. And of course, people must have known that.
Grassby has since had a statue erected in his honour in Canberra as the father of multiculturalism. But our panel believes Grassby should still be the subject of an investigation. Should there be an investigation into Al Grassby?
Yes.
Look, I think Al Grassby was probably one of the most corrupt politicians. His history of taking money from the mafia, of being a paid operator on their behalf, was just completely whitewashed.
Donald McKay, Grassby's rival, paid the ultimate price for campaigning against the mafia. As we've shown tonight, his killing in Griffith in 1977 was almost certainly a mafia execution, what it calls an excellent murder.
You've got to have had information that could cause a great loss of money. You've got to be disrespectful to the clan and also bringing their secret society to the public notice. And sadly, Don McKay ticked all of those boxes.
But it is also still an unsolved crime. Known hitman James Frederick Baisley was eventually convicted of conspiracy to murder McKay, but no one has ever been charged with pulling the trigger.
By that time, everybody...
Our expert panel tonight, including former detective with the Bureau of Criminal Intelligence, Jim Slade, is of the opinion that 2 people attacked McKay that night. You think there has to be more than one person?
I believe there's 2, and just from experience and looking at how the Italians worked, they would have wanted some sort of positive information and corroboration that Donald McKay had been murdered.
On the outskirts of the town, teams of searchers are walking their way through hundreds of kilometres of irrigation canals.
Donald McKay's body has never been found.
Today's unsuccessful search of Lake Wyangan, just outside Griffith, is just one more of the many dead ends police have struck in the search.
2 of those who allegedly ordered his murder died as free men. Robert Ozzy Bob Trimboli in a Spanish hospital in 1987, and Tony Sergi, whose funeral was celebrated in his hometown of Griffith in 2017. Kate, what is important to come from this case that has not been solved?
I'm just looking at this photo here, which I arranged for a photographer to take, and it is the funeral in 2017 of Tony Sergi, one of the people suspected to be involved. It's a gold-plated casket. And what really upsets me just looking at that photo was that here is Don McKay lying somewhere in an unmarked grave, and here is just this ostentatious show of wealth, and the fact that the plaque in the main street under Donald McKay's name says, "Evil triumphs when good men say nothing." Don McKay said something, and it was the evil men that triumphed. And I think that is such an enormous sadness and a tragedy.
The murder of Donald McKay was a turning point in Australian criminal history and Australian law enforcement. But behind the fog of mystery and unanswered questions around the case, the mafia has continued to grow.
They've been able to operate in darkness for so long that we're shining a light on it.
As recently as last year, the Australian Federal Police admitted the Calabrian Mafia, the Ndrangheta, is one of our country's greatest organised crime threats.
The Ndrangheta controls 70 to 80% of the cocaine worldwide, and they are flooding Australia with illicit drugs.
And our panel believes the Ndrangheta continues to have influence where it all began, in Griffith.
We need, down in Griffith, we need another Don. We need another Don McKay in Griffith.
Kate?
His death really focused our eyes on what was truly happening in what seemed like a quiet country town. They are still in business. It's still big business, and they need to be looked at.
His murder then was a pointer to society to never let this happen again. Carry on the good work and don't let an organisation like the underworld of the mafia take over our society.
And Mick, you know the family, the McKay family. Donald McKay didn't die in vain, did he?
No, he didn't. Donald McKay is an Australian icon. Barbara McKay is an Australian icon, and these people must never be forgotten.
Well, we began tonight looking at the death of Donald McKay, a man brave enough to stand up on behalf of his community and demand a response to crime in Griffith. He was murdered for doing just that, and his body has never been found. There is a reward of $200,000 for anyone who can lead police to Donald McKay's remains. And if you have information about what happened to Donald McKay, or if you believe you have seen signs of organised criminal activity, please call Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. Thank you all very much for joining me tonight, and I thank you. I'm Liz Hayes. Good night. Hello, I'm Liz Hayes, and thank you for watching Under Investigation. Subscribe to our channel now for exclusive clips, and don't miss out on full episodes of Under Investigation on 9Now and the 9Now app.